Don't listen to the people around you. Most people are not ill-intentioned, but if you're about to go through a major change, very often your environment is going to give you blowback. Let in the support and information that's going to be good for that, sharing it with the growth-minded people who are part of, my real estate sphere, or like people are on that path where they're constantly optimizing and changing things.
Welcome, everyone, to the Road Less Travel Show. This is a show about people that were successful in a previous career and left that career to go down a different path. I'm your co-host, Richard Coyne.
And I'm your co-host, Bill Zahller.
On today's show, we're so pleased to have Terrie Schauer with us. Terrie, welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Terrie, for being on the guest on the Road Less Traveled show. To start with, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background, what line of work you originally started down?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's a story I don't tell too often because people are, so interested in the real estate aspect that they're, I don't get to talk about like my previous career. So I actually decided that I wanted to be a university professor. So I studied, I went all the way up to Ph.D. I then did a postdoc. So that took me till I finished it when I was 31. Mm-hmm. And so that, I don't know how familiar you are with graduate school, but basically, from the time you're either master's or PhD, it's kind of a full-time job. Because you have teaching responsibilities, income. I'm in Canada, so I had support from the government for my research. So I was basically paid to teach and research on something that has absolutely nothing to do with real estate. And then I kind of came to the end of that, and I'd actually been investing as a side hustle and managing properties on the side. And I was like, what am I going to do? Am I going to get a job as a prof now? Even though I'm qualified and I'd kind of been, preparing myself for that for 10 years, or am I going to, hang up that hat and go full-time into real estate? So I had, a year or two of severe angsting, and then I turned the car around and I went in the real estate direction.
Wow.
Excellent. And what genre, what lane did you go down on the real estate side of it? What's your focus?
Yeah, so I actually started as a property manager. Mm-hmm. So I started house hacking before one even really knew what house hacking was as a student. Mm-hmm. And then when I moved back to my home city of Montreal, I'd been already house hacking for a few years, renting property and renting the other rooms out to students. And then I went to see Dad and was like, Dad, I've been doing this for some years, lend me a down payment and let's go buy a triplex in Montreal, and I'm going to do the same thing. So I did that, and I kind of, upsold it at the time by renting it out by the room to other students, and then 1 property, 2 property, 3 properties. And then we kind of have a similar thing as in the States, except we hit the barrier earlier, which is that if you have all these residential loans, eventually you kind of get tapped out of residential borrowing capacity. And so that happened to us when we got to 3 properties. But I still wanted to keep going. So I'm like, okay, how can I turn this into something bigger? Let me start a property management business, because that was kind of the solution I found. I knew I had a good business model. And so then I basically built a property management business. And then it took me almost 10 years to figure out how to get into bigger deals. So how to do multifamily financing, and then we don't really do syndications the same way in Canada. It's mostly joint ventures because we actually don't have an LLC status here. So then one tends to go from, being a personal investor to then doing joint ventures with other partners. And so that's kind of what I do now. And I've kept part of my management practice, and my secret sauce for making money is through good management. So that's kind of where I am today.
That's great. Yeah. And that is absolutely critical, the management side of it. People sometimes overlook that in the deal and get excited about underwriting and the business model, but the bottom line is so critically important to making those profitable as well.
So Terrie, real quick, for the U.S. folks that aren't familiar with how things are done in Canada, you mentioned there isn't an LLC concept. You're really doing joint ventures. So is it in a way that instead of signing a private placement memorandum, you're essentially signing a joint venture contract?
So basically we have to jump to the incorporation stage right away. Okay. And then Canada's also just a much less litigious environment. So we're not so worried necessarily about lawsuits. We're more worried about, let's say, the fiscal responsibility. And so typically you would incorporate a company and then have a shareholder structure behind that. And like you could kind of like, have the, I guess, managing partner and general partner written in the contract, but like here, by the time you're a shareholder, like pretty much you're kind of on the hook. But because our ecosystem is just a bit different, we don't worry so much about the protections and who holds the liability, because between, our tenancy laws on the one hand and our insurance on the other, like it's quite rare that you're going to end up being stuck with a lawsuit of suing you in the same way that would happen in the US. So that's kind of our like legal ecosystem is a bit different. And so we also, and also like we're taxed a bit more. Right. So that nice LLC thing doesn't exist really up here.
Gotcha. Yeah. In the US, you can sue for looking at somebody funny. I mean, it's a little ridiculous here. So
yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I was going to ask one follow on the Terrie. So what geographical areas are you focused on now with the multifamily side of it?
So very simply, I mean, I'm in the Montreal market, which is like Montreal and surrounding area. I also invest in a submarket about an hour and a half out of town called Trois-Rivières, which is Three Rivers. And so we're in like the French part of Canada, which is like, imagine the California of Canada. So like Canada's already for you guys left. And then we're like the left part of Canada where, and we also have this like bubble around us of French. So like this province really functions in French. And what that does is it kind of keeps other investors out. Mm-hmm. So, there's deals to be had here, but things do function in a specific way. And so like sometimes often we get outside money that wants to come in, but is looking for a local partner who is able to operate on the ground here. And so that's, kind of the space I'm in.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, it almost seems like with those, that environmental situation stacked up, there's no way you could enter the market unless you already had some local connection.
Yeah. Absolutely. Wow. But then, like, I don't know how familiar you and your listeners are with, the Canadian ecosystem, but like you take places like Toronto and Vancouver, mm-hmm. Those are such pricey markets. Like they're on a level with, London and Paris almost. Yeah. So it's very hard to make a buck there, but Montreal and Quebec is kind of on a different wavelength, partly because of that, special ecosystem that we have here tends to keep other people out. And so for people who are at ease operating here, like you can make good money.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So Terrie, in my particular case, I have a master's, but I was so sick of school. I don't know how you put up with 10 years and went all the way to do a PhD. Wow. That's amazing. What was your PhD in?
So it was in communications. And I kind of jumped around through like different faculties, but followed kind of a similar thread. So I was always interested in like sort of how media affects public opinion and I was around criminality and how, criminals and prisoners are portrayed in the media and how that then conditions how people think about criminality. And my PhD was actually looking at that in the US context. So like, I'm a bit familiar with stuff. And I think, having studied that and like now this was of course before social media, right? So like, I graduated 15 years ago from the PhD. And so like, that was before everything. And like, now it's just so media literacy is just such a critical thing that I feel like I kind of got that education at a time when it was like really a good time to get it, just from a what's going on in society point of view.
Right. Wow. So thinking back to your grad school days, your PhD days, is there a funny story you can share?
Oh my God. So many funny stories. You want funny stories, like a funny grad school story or like? Sure.
Anything. Just, keep it PG.
Oh man, I haven't like returned back there in my mind. I mean, in a really long time. No, I mean, I guess, the only like, and what you're going to get out of this is the reason why I ended up leaving academia. So, my funding, I had like 4 years of funding or something. And so I had planned my research in such a way that I was going to be done in 4 years because that's all the money I had, And so I went to see, like, you have your supervisory committee or whatever. And so like at like the 3.5 year mark, like I went to sit down with them and like, okay, guys, like, I have another 6 months of funding left. Like, what do we have to do to make sure that like I can get out 6 months from now? Because, sometimes in these PhD programs, like some people do like 8-year PhDs. And I'm like, okay, well, like I'm not going to be doing volunteer work for 4 years. Like at some point there has to be a bottom line here. And they're like, nope, you're going to be ready when you're ready. I'm like, okay. So like, where is the financial aspect of this? Like I don't know what your expectation is or what the academia's expectation is, but like, do you think like, are you going to put someone in a position where they're basically going to be working unfunded for a year or 2 years, and then you're kind of held hostage to this thing? So I don't know if that's really a funny story, but I think that was like, for me, confirming my decision to get out of that environment, because I felt like the incentives are just a bit perverse. And so then like, there was like a whole bunch of department infighting, and the one supervisor wants you to finish, the other one has an axe to grind with the other one. And then they're procrastinating on giving you the rubber stamp that you need. And it just, this is a whole other conversation on how the universities are, in my opinion, slowly decreasing their own relevance. But that like, there's only so much you can go against the incentives of how the world works. And if you create this weird parallel universe, it can actually become quite corrupt. And so I was,
wow,
turned around and didn't look back.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, when I was in grad school, I was on a fellowship, so I did research in exchange for tuition, and it was awesome. It was great. But in fact, I'm published. However, I quickly realized the topic was just so ridiculously esoteric that I'm like, okay, it occurred to me that this is professors writing papers for professors. In my case, it had no real world relevance. So I'm like, it just seemed like it just turned. I hadn't really intended to go beyond the master's, but at the same point in time, it just reaffirmed that there's no way I can't live in this academia world. So
what was your topic? I'm curious now.
Honestly, I have no freaking idea. It was something financial, and honestly, like I did research to support the paper, and the professor was kind enough to give me a co-authorship. But at the same point in time, I can't even tell you. I have no idea. It was just something ridiculously esoteric about financial theory, and again, not much relevance to the real world. So, yeah.
Terrie, you kind of, I think, maybe touched on it here in the last story there about kind of a deciding factor to get you to change paths from the PhD and professorship kind of role into the real estate. Some of it sound like it was funding or the lack of it, or not real clear guidance on how clear that path forward would be. But what, I guess, if that was part of it, what was the part that drove you to the real estate side in particular? How did you choose real estate?
Yeah. So, I mean, like, let me just backpedal a little bit, because there's another half of that. And, 15 years ago, like I was at the beginning of this, like, kind of, political correct woke moment in the academic world. And, I'm a business person. I come from a business background, and like part of my conclusions were somewhat, I mean, in Canada, like it would be pretty left for you guys, but like for us, it was like flirting with the center line. Mm-hmm. And, I was at a pretty left institution that was going through the beginning of this. And part of the reason why my PhD ended up prolonging itself was because my committee didn't agree with what I was saying. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of have this environment where, like, I also do martial arts. So like I have this, you're basically a blue belt, like grappling with black belts. And like, when you're a PhD student, like you're at the very beginning of your path. And if they want to make it that you don't get out, like if they want to destroy what you're doing, they can easily destroy it because they have 30 years experience in a particular field. Like they're that much further ahead. And so rather than like, being encouraging and being like, okay, Terrie, this is your argument. Maybe I don't agree, but like, this is what you might want to pursue to make it stronger. They're like, nope, you're not graduating with that thesis at the end. Wow. And so like, I basically had to spend like a last unfunded year where like I had to get a job outside of academia to finish my research. And basically like my PhD said what they wanted me to say at the end. And by that time I was just like, I'm so done with this. And then, the real estate world, like for me, because I'd been doing it in parallel, it was like kind of just a jump, like I had already had a few investment properties. I already had a little bit of experience as a property manager, and then like, nothing to do with anything. I got an opportunity, to kickbox in France, because I had like a, martial arts career, I guess you could say. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go. I needed a day job. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to kickbox. And at the same time, I'm going to get a job in a property management company with the goal of learning how to do that. Then when I come home, I'm going to start my own company. And so that's what happened.
Very cool.
Great. Yeah. It's very a different path that a lot of people have between the BJJ and the kickboxing, and that's awesome. Yeah, yeah, and again, I mean, I know it seems like it's amazingly hard and harder every day, but props to you for sticking to your guns on your actual positions and not having to sway to come to the times as people wanted to make everybody bow to their wishes, but. That's great. It's harder to do, obviously.
Yeah. No, but and like if I can, the silver lining to that is so like, 15 years later, like, I've written a book called The Mindful Landlord. I'm working on a second book. I have a podcast. I do coaching in my field. And so like basically those ideas that I didn't get to put out into the world as a PhD student, like it took me 10 years and now I'm doing it through the vehicle of the real estate industry. And, right. I also have my own opinions of some of the maybe topics or slants or voices that I feel like us in real estate, we could profit from a little bit more. But at least in this business environment, I feel like it's just much easier to, say what you think. And by the time you reach financial independence or you kind of do your own thing, you're not going to get canceled the same way, right? Like somebody might step up and argue with you, but like ultimately your listeners are your listeners or your readers are your readers. And so if you're able to sell those ideas in a way that they can, finance themselves or exist on their own, like you're out there in the marketplace of ideas in a way that, through the institution of academia, I felt like that was just never going to be possible the way I wanted it to be. So no, it's really cool. Like, if I could say something like good about real estate is that it gives you this sort of propeller or a step to, do whatever it is that you want to do, like, finance a martial arts career and then eventually be able to espouse the ideas that I want to espouse out there in the public sphere. So it's cool.
Yeah, nice. It's great. Very cool.
Terrie, as you kind of were really like how you did it again, you did this house hacking thing, then you started doing some rental properties while you're in your PhD program, et cetera, providing some side money as well as just ultimately something that wound up becoming your career. What are some limits or some were there some obstacles you had to overcome? You mentioned the no more than 3 loan thing. Is there anything else you want to mention in terms of obstacle?
Yeah. I mean, I think I had like some, 2 major sort of mental roadblocks, which, and like, again, I said in my book, Mindful Landlord, like half of that book is about building a real estate empire, but the other half of it is about building this. Okay. And for me, the real major roadblocks were mental. And, the first one was, I guess, kind of in my mid-20s. I had a bit of an anxiety disorder to the point where like I didn't dare to leave the house by myself for 3 months. And so then to come to, practicing mindfulness and understanding like, how does my mind really work? And if I don't learn how to use this tool, like in an optimal way, it can really ruin my life. And so that's when I started, understanding mindfulness meditation, and then, understanding like how mindfulness, not mindset, understanding how your mind works. And then that just became an incredible sort of trampoline that allowed me to do what I did in martial arts, allowed me to do what I did in real estate. And so, I think that was kind of coming through that obstacle of being like, I have a lot of, limiting beliefs. I had a lot of, anxiety really. And then to understand what is that physiologically, what is that mentally, how can I structure myself in such a way internally that I don't suffer from that anymore. So I think that was the first obstacle. And then the second obstacle was really this kind of internal, external tension. And, I think my environment, my community, my family, whatever, was very invested in me becoming an academic. And one of the most difficult things when I began to see that like that was not going to be my path, it was like there was like a 2-year time horizon where I'm like, it's like you're in a bad relationship. Like, I know this is not going to work out, but I don't dare to leave the relationship because like all of our friends are in common and everybody thinks I should be married to this guy for the rest of my life. And, you know, even though you internally might know this is not the right path for me, like the whole environment around me, like was really encouraging me to remain there. And, you know, you spent 10 years preparing for this, like, why would you give it up? You're throwing your life away. You know, like I remember some of those conversations I had and they were like really intense conversations. And I think that that's like quite common for anybody who does one of these like, you know, major 360s in their life of being like, you know, I guess for you guys, like I have this W-2 or I have this like particular career. And then all of a sudden everybody around you is used to the security of being able to say, well, this is Terrie and this is financially her plan. And now she's going to do this completely risky thing. And, you know, I was also just lucky that at that time, you know, I didn't have kids. I didn't have any real responsibilities. And so like going to France allowed me to just be like, I don't know anybody here. I'm far away from my family. I can really try on having a different life and being somebody else. And then 3 years later, when I came back, I had transformed into that person. And then it's like, I come back, I'm like, okay, well, this is now Terrie, the martial artist and the real estate person. Like everyone's forgotten that I wanted to be an academic at one point. So.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Yeah. That's,
well, Terrie, as you look back, and I think you kind of touched a little bit of it, but what was like one of your first victories as you shifted to the real estate world? I mean, some of the house hacking, but was there at one point, like one deal that just solidified the fact like, all right, this is achievable. I can do this. This is a path forward full time.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the like real first victory was getting the job in the property management company in France. Right. Cause like I arrived there and it's a completely different culture. And so like, you know, when you're getting a first job in a field where like, you're not necessarily qualified, like, you know, I wrote the CV like in another language and then went for interviews. And then like, I finally, you know, kind of got the job that I wanted there. And like, that was a huge victory. And then when I came home and I kind of like after 3 years came home and decided, okay, I'm going to like start my own company. And then I went out and printed 100 business cards. I had no idea what I was doing. And I basically like started cold calling, right? Like going around the neighborhood, meeting people, like calling for rent ads and being like, oh, you know, I'll rent your unit, or I have this idea of how to make you more money with it. Like, you're going to trust me with that. And for me, that was just, you know, when people started saying yes to that was like a huge thing, because I'd always been in this, you know, academic world where you didn't have to sell anything and I wasn't used to putting myself out there. And so the fact of like kind of coming into that space and beginning to feel comfortable in it, that was like a huge initial victory when I'm like, I saw like, okay, this transition that I'm trying to do, it's going to work.
Right. Yeah. And it goes back to what you're saying to the mindset, you know, as you shifted your realities from coming back from France, when you went over and then came back, you became the person you wanted to be.
Yeah. But then, you know, for the world, it's one thing, like sometimes you go through a mental shift and then it takes the world a certain amount of time to realign with the new person that you are. And for me, like the real like taste of that victory was like when the world starts responding to you in a different way. And like that was, you know, if you ask me, like one of my big victories, that was like the moment when I'm like, okay, all of this like soul searching and angsting, like it's going to work, you know?
That's great.
Cool.
Yeah.
So Terrie, in your real estate world, your property management world, more recent times, is there a funny story you can share?
Oh my goodness. I mean, property management, like it's such a crazy thing. There's like, you know, funny stories all the time. I'm just trying to think. It's like, you know, every week. Yeah. I mean, I can, you know, share a recent one from you with a tenant. So we had, you know, one building where the tenants, like I work in low income areas. So like often we get a lot of just, you know, special people. And this one particular special tenant called the city inspector on us. Like, I guess it's the same, you know, thing. Someone, you know, tenants can try to get you to have a citation from some kind of urban authority. And the day that we showed up there with the city inspector, she had made a washing machine, like a dishwasher installation herself. Like her boyfriend had like done some completely not to code installation. She'd like hacked up half the kitchen. In the common spaces was like a derelict washing machine.
Mm-hmm.
And then the city inspector shows up to like see whatever infraction I was supposed to have. And then the person goes in there and is like, what is this? Like, ultimately, she was the one who ended up getting written up for that. So,
yeah, it's definitely a game that we call them, I don't know if you call them the same thing in Canada, but we call them professional.
Yeah.
They figured out how to game the system and they just will roll that forward. And, in our case, just if we evict somebody for non-payment, it's very frustrating on the end here because we can't report that to the credit agencies till 2 weeks after they're out. And by that time, they've already found another place to live.
Yeah.
So it's no skin off them. And then again, the ability to collect on bad debt after somebody's evicted is almost nothing, So very frustrating.
Yeah.
Well, Terrie, where are you today in your journey? You said from the house hacking side to doing more JV deals. So kind of where are you now and where do you look to your goals going forward?
Yeah. So I guess like I'm, slowly growing my portfolio, on my own with joint ventures, like similar kind of properties, like mid-sized multifamily, up here in Montreal. I'm pretty focused now also on, growing my podcast. And, I'm also part of like a coaching association up here called the Real Estate Investors Club. And so like we basically have monthly meetups and then we have a coaching program that helps other people go through a similar path. I'm going to just stand up for you because that will also answer where my goals are. So my goal for the rest of the year is to slow down.
Yeah. So for the people on audio that have no idea what just happened, that's Terrie's having a baby. Congratulations.
So I have actually one last deal that I'm in the process of doing. And like last week I was at an inspection and I was like standing for 3 hours in the sun and I'm like, no more deals. Like now we're going to have to say stop for a little bit and cool it on the real estate, at least for a little while.
Well, good for you.
Yeah. What's the name of your podcast and what's your subject matter on that one?
So it's called the Real Estate Investors Club podcast. And I'd say we're about 50% market specific to, Canada and the local market. And then the other half is really kind of some of that mindfulness stuff that I was talking about. So we have maybe, 25 to 50% of our guests are Americans. And then often they will end up telling a story that, how they overcame certain obstacles or mentally different shifts that they had. And I also like try to keep like a fair amount of the perspective of like, of the why, right? Like it's good to do, I call them the 3Ds, more deals, more doors, more dollars. So I think if us who are in real estate, we're always interested in having, a bigger pile or pushing the package, but there's the other half of that, which is the rest of your life. And, the leverage that you're, making and the trade-offs that you make with your family life, with your health, with all of those different things. And, like I being a little bit funny about standing up and showing the pregnant belly, but like, it's actually legit true because as you have all these opportunities that come, like, especially, as a woman, as a mother in this environment, like you do have to make choices and the choices, how do I take care of myself? How do I take care of my kids versus do I do another deal or do I chase more zeros at this point? And like, sometimes the answer is, yeah, it's time to, put the pedal to the floor in the career aspect. And sometimes it's time to be like, no, I've built myself this system that gives me access to financial freedom and passive income. Like, let me just enjoy that and use it for what I built it for, which is a security net that like, I'm not eligible for whatever maternity leave there is here, but like my tenants are going to keep paying. So
right.
I've built myself a safety net that I can use when I'm able to like turn down my ambition hamster. So
that's great. Yeah.
Very cool. Terrie, is there something that you do personally or perhaps through your business that you can mention that you do to give back in a way that it's some way to help others?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, that you guys run a podcast, like podcasts, like we're not making the big bucks with doing what we're doing, right? And the same thing as with the real estate coaching, with being an author, like those are all things that if they generate income, it's like barely breaking even. But I kind of feel called to share some of those ideas and some of that knowledge that has allowed me to have this lifestyle and go on this great journey. And so be it some of the mindfulness stuff that's really helped me like overcome personal mental hurdles, or if it's business advice, that's what I really get a lot out of. Like I spent maybe about 50% of my time running my own business, but the other half is definitely spent coaching others, be it through, I have my broker's license. So like sometimes I broker deals, but it's usually for people who are starting out as investors. And like, I want to help them find their first property, make sure it's going to be profitable, and then send them off into the sunset on their journey. And if my book can do that, if a podcast can do that, like I really, once you've gotten to a certain point yourself, I think the real joy comes from seeing other people around you succeed. And so that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, again, this is one of the things that's really important to Bill and myself, and that is to give back in some way. We do that through the podcast, through local meetings we run. A lot of people were very gracious with some of their ideas and thoughts early when we were getting started. So we want to try to help others in some fashion along that way as well. So, kudos to you. Good.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could give you guys a shout out, like I, didn't maybe do as much research on your show as I could have before coming on as a guest, but like I can see what the kind of questions you're asking, and like getting some people like your guests to tease out, how did you go through that transition? I think that's incredibly valuable because, I was playing this game and going through this transition when I really didn't have very much financial responsibility. Like I was single, no family, no kids, no real responsibilities. But I think for a lot of people, it's very heavy because if they're, 35 and they're thinking like, let me get into real estate full time, like maybe there's a couple of kids and maybe there's a house and maybe there's other people depending on them. And it can be very scary. And to the extent that like, you provide other stories or information or inspiration for people who are going through that process, I think that's like really valuable.
Yeah. Thank you. We appreciate that. And again, just going back for a second, in my case, when I said I did my master's and MBA, well, I knew that I couldn't get used to an income and then quit and go back. So I did it back to back with my undergrad, which is one of the reasons why I was so fixated on, I can't take this anymore. I got to get out there and start, doing some real world stuff. But the point is that this is what we are trying to do. We're trying to let people know that, look, if you have a W-2 job and you love it, great. But if you open your mind to something else, there may very well be another path for you, and that's the whole thing. It doesn't necessarily have to become a full-time path. It could be a part-time path. It could be the thing that's a side hustle that helps generate an additional stream of income, which we also fully believe is super important, especially in today's world. But yeah, just, hey, again, you may love your W-2 job, go for it, keep doing it, do the best you can, help your family, etc. But definitely there are other paths out there. So very cool.
Absolutely. Well, is there something you've recently implemented in your business that's allowed you to scale a little bit faster?
Well, I don't know how recent this is, but definitely, with looking at what my life's going to be like for the next 6 months to a year, I've done an additional hire, and I'm just in the process of like setting up, like getting a little bit more real about delegation. And I think that, for all of us entrepreneurs, like it can be sometimes difficult to delegate effectively and then to not end up just picking up the pieces and like there's like a little bit of weeding that needs to be done. And like very often, like I do have a small team, but like, sometimes the way the team functions, like so-and-so is less diligent about doing something. And so like I have a tendency to just pick up whatever they drop kind of behind the scenes. But like, I guess at the point where you're looking like, no, I really need to become more diligent about delegating. And so, enabling people in their own, or enabling my team members in their own growth to be like, no, I'm not going to step in and solve this problem for you. Like if this is what I would do, but for example, you created this problem, like now you get on the phone and solve it. Like I'm not going to be the manager who gets on the phone and fixes it. The E-Myth is a really great book for this, for, those of us entrepreneurs who feel like we need to be doing everything. And I think it's not bad to like have refreshers on the topic, to just be like, how corrupted has my delegation become, where like people are not like staying in their lane as much as they should. So.
Yeah. I think, absolutely correct. I mean, that's kind of, as an entrepreneur, you, in the beginning, you do everything because you're starting it up, but as you bring on employees, you still have the tendency to want to, do it the way you want to do it. And you spend more time working in your business and on your business. And the same thing with their growth. You're just kind of robbing them from their ability to grow and mature as employees too, making the decisions, being responsible for them. If you're always kind of stepping in and being there, they won't ever grow to the person you want them to be either. So that's, very, very well said.
Nice. Yeah. Terrie, what advice would you share with somebody that's considering making a path change?
Don't listen to the people around you. No, or let me be a little bit more sort of intentional about how I want to frame that. Like, there will be people around you who have a safety monkey screaming in their head. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that it's like, most people are not ill-intentioned. But if you're about to go through a major change in your own life in the way you do things, very often your environment is going to give you blowback. Mm-hmm. And, you need to do whatever you need to do to let in the support and information that's going to be good for that, and to just have a bit of a firewall between the negative blowback. And like, I feel like if I refer back to my own process through this, like I've known in my heart when I need to change things or when something's not working for me. And sometimes, like, because I'm looking for support and I want to, I want the people I care about to tell me what I want to hear, I'll bring stuff up at dinner when I kind of also know that it's not going to be a productive conversation that's going to make me leave from there feeling good and feeling like, I'm excited to make this change, Mm-hmm. And so like I've become more intentional about when I'm trying to go through something like that, sharing it with the growth-minded people who are part of, my real estate sphere, or like some of the other spheres where like people are on that path where they're constantly optimizing and changing things. Because if you share that stuff with people who are like, a bit more rigid and a bit less growth minded, often it can just throw a whole lot of cold water on whatever you're doing. And it can be super discouraging. And sometimes it can take you like a week to pull yourself out of that mental funk. Like, wow, I wish I just didn't bring that up at family dinner, because then like the magpies spent half an hour picking away at my idea. And now I feel like it's a bad idea, Yeah. So that would be my advice.
Good. I like that.
Well, Terrie, what's the best way for our listeners to reach out and learn more about what you have going on, your book, your podcast?
Sure. So my book, Mindful Landlord, is available on Amazon. And then I have my website, terrieschauer.com, which is kind of a portal into everything. You can find the podcast on there. Obviously, the Real Estate Investors Club podcast is available on any podcast platform where you listen to stuff. And then you can just reach out to me on social media, Terrie Schauer, like my name. I'm probably most active on LinkedIn, but you can find me on any of the major platforms.
Great. And we'll link all that below in the show notes to make it easier for them to reach out. Well, Terrie, we really want to thank you again for being on the Road Less Traveled show today. Really enjoyed the conversation and wish you continued success.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you, Terrie. We certainly appreciate your time. And we also want to thank our listeners. Please continue to give us a 5-star rating so we can bring you more great content like our show today with Terrie Schauer. And also, we want to remind everybody of 2 important things Park Capital Partners has going on. First, we have the Park Capital Partners Value Add Fund, which is a 506c fund open today to accredited investors. And then next, another way that Bill and I give back is through our foundation that we created, which is a nonprofit. It's a 501c, I always say it wrong, 501c3 nonprofit that Bill and I created as a way to give back. We do that a couple important ways. First, we fund it because we want the money donated to go to do its best work, which is to help others. Second, we donate personally. Third, we donate corporately. And finally, when investors invest with us in one of our projects, we make a donation to honor that investor to a pre-selected list of 15 different charities. So reach out. Bill and I are happy to have a conversation anytime. ParkCapitalPartnersLLC.com, ParkCapitalPartnersLLC.com. And again, thank you, Terrie, for being on. And remember, the road less traveled may be calling you. We recommend that you listen and take action. Thanks for joining.